Okay, just making sure I've admitted everyone in the waiting list. So you're very welcome to Ignite 3, which is focusing on print projects. And just to remind you all, it's kind of, we're focusing on literary projects of all kinds in this series of events. Sort of with a view to people applying for the Arts Council's project award, the Literature Project Award, which was a thing before 2010 and then stopped for a decade and was reintroduced in 2020. So it's currently at 30 grand, up to 30 grand, and it's basically just a really good way for writers to become editors, producers, project managers, and to pay themselves as well as other artists involved in the project a more generous fee than maybe the kind of one-off gigs that writers are used to getting. So, and as I say, this episode is kind of focusing on print projects of all kinds, and we'll talk about costs and print runs and artist fees and sales outlets and subscriptions, but also the creative aspects of that. And I guess, yeah, so we'll kind of begin with conversation around journals, and maybe some of the conversation is relevant to people creating anthologies or one-off books or kind of standard print formats. But we're also going to talk about what we'll say just print, generally speaking, print objects, maybe things that are less standard. And speaking to visual artist Laura, who is kind of I'll introduce Laura now. I'll kind of give the biogs and you'll get a sense of what she does. So I'll just run through all the people on the call, all the speakers on the call here, and then we'll get going. So Laura is a visual artist and she works in drawing, painting, video and text. She's a graduate of NCAD and the Royal College of Art London. And she was shortlisted for the Zurich Portrait Prize in 2020. And has recently exhibited at URHA, at IMA, at IVA International, the art festival there in Limerick, and at the Limerick City Gallery of Art. And she's currently at her first art fair in Sweden. So her interesting background and maybe some background noises. She's coming live from Sweden at the fair while they're setting up there. Also joining us is Nidhi Zak, he was a poet, pacifist, and fabulist. I noticed that follows you around, and Nidhi, that line. And her first collection of poetry is Auguries of a Minor God, published by Faber and Faber in 2021. And Nidhi is the founder of the Play It Forward Fellowships for writers who are traditionally underrepresented in Irish literature. She's poetry editor at Skein Press and at Fallow Media, and she's contributing editor with The Stinging Fly, and currently serves on the expert advisory committee for Culture Ireland, as well as the advisory board for Diversifying Irish Poetry. So an incredibly busy person. And then joining us as well is Maggie Masterson, who's the production manager for Paper Lanterns, teen and YA literary journal, a journal which features essays, creative writing, art, photography, book reviews, and features by teenagers and older YA enthusiasts. She's a former youth librarian in the Chicago suburbs, and she sits on the executive committee for the Irish Society for the Study of Children's Literature. And she's currently doing doctoral research on the construction of girlhood in the Pollard collection of children's books at Trinity. And she is joining us from Trinity College too. And it's Maggie I'm going to come to first. I guess just to talk about your experiences and learnings and advice for others based on Paper Lanterns. Would you, I guess, maybe talk about, I guess I'm really keen to get into the practical stuff of like, what are the print runs? What costs are involved? What lines need to go into your budget? What might people forget to put into their budgets? And maybe start with some of those, if that's okay. Tell us about Paper Lanterns.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. We We are very small. We're in our second year. We're currently working on issue 9. We're very pleased that we've survived a pandemic, but we're still very much kind of in the growing pains of solidifying all our processes. Although I will say this year has been much better than the first year. We currently print 250. Our print run is 250, and we incur the cost for that. We found that printing less than 250 didn't really save us on cost. We kind of shopped around printers and got to a minimum, and it didn't make a difference if we only printed 200 or if we printed 250. So think about your minimums, think about your audience, and think about you know, the differentials in cost. 250 is too many. We probably sell anywhere between 100 and 150 of our runs. However, because of the pandemic, we had made lots of inroads with the public libraries in most of the counties on the island, but that came to a crashing halt. So we do hope to kind of regenerate that stream. And
that's really interesting. How did you engage with libraries? Did you literally like gather up email addresses? And
we did, yeah.
And what sort of numbers would an individual library take, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically libraries seem to be, and I can't really speak to this because no one's doing it yet, but in the email correspondence, I did kind of look back, and you know, we had like Kildare, Dublin, Mayo, Galway City Library, Cork, Clare, so kind of a wide variety of libraries that were interested in stocking us, and they were all asking for, I would say, an average of 4 issues, 4 copies per issue. So, you know, we're not talking very large numbers here for us at all.
No, it's something, because when you think of how hard, like anyone running a journal will know, every issue, you know,
every issue counts.
Hard to sell them.
Yeah.
And there are more and more there, and yeah, so everyone counts if you can do 4 at a time instead of 1.
We'd love to sell. We'd love to give 2. I mean, honestly, 2 to almost every county would be a huge help to us. Yeah. You know, if we just knew that we were 50 copies were going to the libraries out of 250, that would be something to kind of count on. We'll see how that goes. We spend, our printing costs run us about €1,100 per issue. At 250 copies, that's about €4.30 per issue.
Per issue, and that's a full color.
That's a full color 68-page covered A5 print journal, which I left at my desk, but I will run and get, so I can hold it up and show you. So you know, it's a standard journal size. It was very important to us as a teen journal to make sure that we were putting ourselves on the same professional level as other print journals. Yeah. And the fact that we even have a print journal was all about the philosophy of giving teens equal creative space and kind of properly amplifying them the way we amplify adult creatives in the same world, essentially. So those journals cost us $4.30 each. We sell them for €10. We can't get teens to spend more than that on a journal. And while they're not probably our primary customer, it's usually parents of teens and that kind of thing. We don't want it to be prohibitive for teens to purchase on their own.
Yeah.
So the cost of the journal is €10. So we're not, I mean, that's, you know, that's like a 43% cost to us. And that's including the barcode. And may I please tell you all, if you do any kind of print project, make sure you pay the €18 for your barcode. If it ends up in any kind of repository or archive or any kind of digital system, you're going to want to pay for that barcode. If you want to sell it to shops, you're going to need the barcode. It's something that I've heard in other workshops that people think, no, I don't need that. It's just creative, you know, it's mom and pop stock in the shop kind of thing. But no, I think you want a little bit more of a trace of it if you can. Yeah,
you definitely do. And I think, yeah, if you want to get a shop generally, you know, won't take it.
Yeah, in the shops you'll definitely need the barcode. Yeah, for sure.
I remember having a conversation with Gill Distributors. So Gill is the publisher, but they also have a kind of distribution wing, and the first issue of Holy Show is like, you know, would you take it, or how much would we need to be selling for you to take it? And they're like, you know, if it's not, you know, 2,000 minimum, and and you're not producing really regularly, we produce one a year, then they sort of don't want to know you, because you won't make money for them. And also, you know, if you're just setting up a new journal, a distributor kind of relies on shop demanding your stock in their shops. So, and having books upstairs and a few kind of good literary outlets demanding from, you know, that's just not enough. They want the Eastons and, you know, and others who just won't be looking for these kind of niche journals. So really you're talking about, you know, your sales outlets are the people you can hand deliver to and have relationships with too, and the online sales of it. And as you say, libraries, are there any other kind of
I think
the balance or breakdown in terms of your sales for like how things?
Yeah, I think shops are a big part of our projected plan, as well as libraries. We're in books upstairs. We're in I think we're in 8 shops across the island right now. O'Mahony's in Limerick. Charlie Byrne is just stocking us, starting with this issue. Just Books in Mullingar, you know, so we've been tried to be strategic about making sure we're, you know, all over the island and not just Dublin centric. The 3 of us that work on the journal are in Dublin, so we're trying to be conscious of that. However, as you say, you know, we were stocked with Dubray. We weren't selling enough with them. They don't want to stock us anymore. Things that kind of comes and goes and fluctuates all the time. Some sell better than others. Somebody's mom goes in and buys all 10 copies, you know, and then they'll take the next issue. But if that one, you know, it just depends on who we print, I think, which teens get printed. So we're a little bit at the mercy of that. I imagine it's different for an adult.
It also depends, I think, on like I'm just remembering now, we did get Easons to sign up to like take us on, because let's say Holy Show is, you know, we try and make it look like it for everyone. And there's always a face on the cover, and you know, it's a kind of contemporary Irish life and art that it could be appealing to, you know, a really broad range of people. And so we got stocked in Easons and we were in lots of shops. But you know, if the people going into Easons to look at magazines isn't your market, then it won't move from those shelves. So we did sell maybe 100 or whatever through loads of different Easons, but even the work in getting it to Easons,
Yes.
you know, the admin involved.
Yeah, that's the other consideration. Even the shops, even selling to the shops, if you get a shop that'll take, let's say, 5 copies of every issue and they'll take them for the year kind of thing.
Yeah.
We produce 3 issues a year. So you know, you got to post them out to them. There's the post costs are the other thing I would say are huge, especially with online commerce. Every journal that you put out costs money, and that has to be built in, and you have to consider not just your artists and your contributors' fees, but also that post costs will go up. So project ahead a little bit for that. Our website cost went up. We told the Arts Council it was going to be this. It increased by 50 or almost the next week. So that was because we started to get more international e-commerce, and we had to pay the website host to put in shipping zone software. So also, if you're going to be Irish exclusive and you just want to sell your journals in Ireland, it will cost you less on your e-commerce website. We use Stripe. You know, do your homework on how you're going to take payment. All the percentages are different with different vendors. So those kinds of hidden costs, I think post was something we didn't expect to be so expensive. Not just the post, but the envelopes are expensive. You know, like the things you have to do to wrap the journal to keep it safe so it doesn't get banged. So you're not posting a second one because it got damaged, you know, by the dog when it got whatever. So those kinds of things I think are important. All the nitty gritty of actual distribution, I think, is tricky.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking of, you know, we were talking about budgets and budget breakdowns and other line items you mentioned, like Stripe, and subscription is something that's been really good to Holy Show, getting subscribers on board, and we were lucky enough to get some additional funding for a kind of a subscribe to us campaign, and so we've got like 200 subscribers as of Christmas and a few more since, and that makes up, you know, about 40% of our sales now, and it's kind of a guaranteed easy enough first 40%. So if you can get something going like that through Stripe or your PayPal, that's incredibly helpful. And there are, I don't know if Ian Mullaney will thank me or hate me for mentioning his name. He sets up our Stripe for us and does it for the Stinging Fly and things like that. He is an incredible coder. But like, I put in a fee every year for coding fees for Ian, because things fall apart on the internet or things need updating, and it can be tricky. So even choosing your website, actually choosing a website that speaks to Stripe or it speaks to PayPal, and working out, do we need to upgrade so that we can, employ the subscription thing that Stripe allows. So little things like that. It's trying to set these things up and test them before you've begun using them, well before you've begun, is really helpful. And there is there's unavoidable trial and error goes into all this, and lots of error on my part anyway.
Yeah, I actually have a note written here that says, set it all up before you announce a launch date, because it's going to take you at least twice as long as you thought it would take you. Your website isn't going to work. Your Stripe isn't going to take payments. PayPal is going to be mad at you for something. I mean, it took us, I think, double the time that we thought it would take us. And we had one member of the team pushing for an earlier launch and the rest of us going, wait a minute, we don't even know how to sell this thing yet. So, yeah, I would agree with that, Brendan. You have to, and then, even back to the point about distribution, say you get into all the shops in Dublin and you're Dublin centric and you're happy that way, somebody's got to deliver that stuff, and then it's admin time. It's a cost no matter how you deliver it. So it just has to be thought through. And back to that point about admin costs and paying artists and paying, staff and that kind of thing. We've, for 2 years now, we've underestimated the time and the money that we put, that we should be earning, I think, as editors and me as the project manager. So. Okay.
We said we would share some rough details on our budget. So let's do that, and I'll go first. I guess we were also saying it's kind of an awkward thing to talk about. We're not going to say who we pay to what artists, but it's also incredibly valuable, I think, not just for other producers or editors to hear, but for writers to kind of hear the breakdown, and what people's minimum fees are and things like that. And as you say, like, I think your journal and Banshee and others you mentioned, Tolka, are transparent about their fees, usually for their kind of calls for submissions about what they're going to be paying for poems or for stories or essays or things like that. But I think the more the more writers know about fees, the better. And so from Match in the Dark, at least, we'll be doing a lot more work on that in the second half of the year, about encouraging others to be transparent about their fees, but also setting new minimum rates. And I'll try and we have a document that's kind of nearly ready that sets new minimum rates, and I'll try and get that to everyone who has been on these calls, so that they know what to apply for on behalf of the artists that they want to publish. But just to talk about Holy Show, we get funded through the Arts Grant Award, which the application is a bit earlier in the year, but we still get kind of project award amounts. So we get 19 grand, we have for the last couple of years. We, from other income, the total cost of running the thing, and we produce like one issue a year, and we usually do some kind of touring event or major event, plus a number of launches at which we pay artists to contribute. So the kind of total cost is about 28 or 29 grand currently, of which the Arts Council makes up 19 of that. So we try and make up about 10 grand ourselves from basically event tickets and guarantees from venues and magazine sales and subscriptions, things like that. On the magazine, our budget is about 9 to 10 grand for artists. So we have 8 or 9 pieces in each issue, and we in our heads have about $1 grand per piece, and usually a piece involves a collaboration between 2 or 3 artists. So sometimes it's just one artist, in which case, now Laura has written for Holy Show, and Laura will be like, I didn't get paid this, because Laura was in on the second issue, or I think like a pre-Arts Council funded issue, but what we're now able to pay artists is kind of a bit better. But I think, you know, we should be honest about our, you know, I say our artist budget was 9 to 10 grand. Our first issue, it was 2.5 grand, and then after that it was 3 or 4, and now it's kind of much better as we're Arts Council funded. But so yeah, maybe something like a third or just over when other events and launches are taken into consideration. The artist budget is about 12 grand, and then there's 2 editors on Holy Show. We try and pay each other 3 grand each. That's a budget that you usually chip away at when you've kind of forgotten other costs, or the price of posts goes up, or things like that, or you don't sell as many as you hoped, or those kinds of things. So expect, you know, put in a generous budget for yourself. Talk to the Arts Council about what is fair. What Match in the Dark provisionally is going to be recommending is €200 per day minimum for anyone who is an editor or producer on a project like this. So that might seem a lot, but this isn't going to be, you know, your day job for the entirety of the year. It's a kind of a one-off project. I'd be interested to hear if that sounds high or low to Laura, so we'll have that conversation when we come to it. And then try and factor in all the work that you're going to be doing, and then multiply that by the number of days and the daily fee, and the number of editors. We have a social media budget for various different things. Try and put in about like 400 or 500 for that. We do a lot of like boosting, small boosts of various different posts, and to push sales, and that tends to work. We have launch fees for artists, designers fee, which like we have, I guess we've friends who are doing it at mates rates, but that's 1,500 for an issue, plus all the various posters and ads that are required to sell that. Postage for sales, like it's now a tenner to send our magazine to the States. For a magazine that costs a tenner, it's kind of ludicrous. And it's $3.50 to send around Ireland, and like $6.50 for UK and Europe, something like that. So know those costs and multiply them by what you think you'll sell, to account for them. You want to, in a way, you want to add up all possible costs, come up with as many costs, many like honest costs as possible. Predict everything, predict increase in prices. When you get a quote from the printer, put on 5% contingency, or, you know, if you're applying for next year, presume prices will go up, that kind of thing. And then boring things like bank fees. If you've got a limited company, you'll have to get an accountant and do a tax return. That will cost maybe 500 quid plus VAT. Website domain, email, hosting, all that crack. Like I said, coding fees, and then programs like Zoom or Adobe or Submittable or SurveyMonkey, all that goes into it. So all of that kind of adds up to about 28 grand for us. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. The minimum fees we pay to artists is still, like, depending on the size of the job, that grand may be broken down as like as little as now 150, but sometimes it's one artist, a big piece, they give us all the work, and it would be up to $1,000. So that's kind of how it works for us. I'm rambling, so back to you, Maggie.
Okay, we do things a little bit differently. We don't pay by issue. We kind of work on a yearly rolling basis. You know, okay, I'm gonna actually, I think I will share the screen. Sorry, Brendan, I wasn't going to, but I think I'll just share the screen if that's okay.
Yeah, if let me know if you're not able.
Let me make my
okay, we're seeing.
Okay, so this is just a working doc that we had for our last Arts Council application. We are currently funded by the Literature Project. The first year we were funded by the bigger Arts Grant project. but we didn't ask for the full amount and we weren't granted the full amount of the arts grant project. Anyway, another discussion, but you can kind of see here, printing and barcodes. So, you know, it tells you one, we need 3 per year. So the total for the year for the 3 issues is $3,000, you know, 3,200. The website, as I said, we posted this on our Arts Council app and it went up. It's at about 210 euro, I think, right now. It does include security, all the hosting support, and the e-commerce, the Stripe. And then we've kind of broken down, our fees are based on, we talk extensively to Sonder Channel and Banshee. I think we are definitely at the bottom of the pool there right now. Our current Arts Council grant that we're waiting to hear back from, these fees have all been bumped. Kind of what Brendan was speaking about earlier, you're always kind of catching up on that. So the one thing that we've had an issue with is that half of the journal for us is submitted by teen creators, the other half by adults. It is our goal and our practice to print 50% of the journal has to be from teen contributors, 13 to 18 years old. It was important to us to pay equitably regardless of age. It's also important to us to honor some labor laws, and you can't necessarily pay a 13-year-old, you know, into their PayPal account. So we do offer book vouchers in lieu, or now what we've been learning is book vouchers are not insensitive, but not every contributor reads or can read print, which is interesting, but sometimes our artists, we're featuring a young person in this current issue that we're working on who's dyslexic and doesn't read, she listens to books. So we have to come up with creative ways to pay our teen contributors, but this gives you an idea of what we put in every issue, 1,600 euro per issue. There is the postage I was talking about. We assume 75% of the journals we send out are staying in Ireland. That's actually probably less now. This was based on the 4th issue when we submitted for the Arts Council. We're at issue 9 now, and it's definitely changed. We're sending a lot more journals to Africa, to different, mostly Nigeria, different countries in Africa. I'm not sure how we got on the radar there, but it's brilliant. And I think, anyway, it's also another conversation. So staff salaries are the majority of what it costs us to do. Like most of us, we all have day jobs. So we figured out that it was easier to kind of say upfront, I can afford to give the journal X amount of hours a week. And we came up with 7.5. Originally it was 6, now we're at 7.5. I think we've bumped to 9 for the next round of funding. You know, and you can see here, myself and the 2 editors are paid 13 euro an hour. We have an intern for every issue, a start to finish intern who helps with all the way from submissions to, you know, social media posts after launch. And that person receives 11 euro an hour. And that is the bulk of where our funding goes, our monies go. The reviewers that we have, we give them a book. The book is theirs to keep. We post those books at $6.20 to post the book. That's quite costly for us. We did invest in merchandise. We have bags and notebooks this year, so we built that in. And then, you know, distribution, the designer, she's at $9.90 per issue. She works 6 weeks at 11 hours a week. She's basically working quite inexpensively. We have also bumped in our next Arts Council app. Sorry. Venue hire. We just had our first in-person launch. We have no experience with in-person launches because we launched in a pandemic. So we're working on that. We were at Books Upstairs. It was brilliant. We had a lovely time. We had teen contributors come and read, and it was just very uplifting, gorgeous day. And they sold our merchandise and our journal for us. And then we kind of worked out that $150 fee that basically covered their staff costs after hours because they had also kind of just reopened. The cafe wasn't even officially open yet when we launched. So we do pay an accountant. He does the bank rec for us. He takes care of that for us. He does it a lot. He works with a lot of kind of smaller, either individual artists or smaller organizations, a lot of arts related projects. their company is called Cloud Accountants. I wasn't necessarily going to promote a commercial for him, but he's
No,
brilliant.
that's okay. It's really interesting to hear. So he's kind of a bookkeeper, is that correct?
Yeah,
Like
he's a
manages
proper
the bank
accountant.
account
Yeah.
and pays
Yeah.
invoices and keeps
Yeah.
the records. That's really interesting.
Yeah, he's about €100 a month, and the way, I think that with the VAT service, he reconciles the VAT for us, you know. I think we were required by I can't remember how we ended up with him, but part of it was we were having a lot of trouble. We had some turnover in the licensing of the company. One of the founders left. We had to reorganize the whole company, redo all the paperwork. Anyway, he came on board to help us do that. And then we just stuck with him monthly because it's a bit of a hassle. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider. And last year, when we did it on our own, and the amount of hours we all put in doing that, we pretty much worked out. It was like a €200 difference for the year between our time or his time. And so his company sets you up with a QuickBooks account, and it's an online situation where they get into your QuickBooks, you get into your QuickBooks and everything. You can send your invoices from there. You can do all your, anything you send to the bookshops or whatever, all of it goes through our account with our accountant through QuickBooks. It's brilliant. We love it. It's gotten rid of most of our spreadsheets on Google Drive and things like that we were sharing between each other. So I recommend it. I think it's been money well spent for us anyway. And then there's like mailings. We're in contact with the schools, so we do a proper physical mail out at the beginning of every school year to pretty much every school across the island. Insurance, don't forget about your insurance. We have insurance particularly because we have young people at in-person events, etc. So that's kind of it. We do have, right now, we only have 7 patrons. We had more in the beginning. It's something we need to work on, and we do have subscribers as well. So
thanks so much for that. That's really interesting, honest. Yeah, and I think the one thing I'm grateful to myself for is my own laziness and lack of ambition in only publishing 1 issue a year, because you guys are doing that 3 times every year, and I suppose so the costs add up, and it's a much bigger ask from the Arts Council in a way.
Our funding, so I shared this with Brendan, and I will share this with the group, because we got Arts Council funding for the arts project, the arts grant fund, the first time we applied. Second year we applied for the arts grant fund, and we literally hit the wrong buttons on the application, and we hit post instead of upload for all of our documents. Post means unpost, and they never received our application. So we got word. They were kind enough to say to us, "Oh my gosh, this terrible thing happened to you guys. You should consider the literature project." So we turned that application around and applied for the literature project a few months later, and that's what we're operating with this year. That budget is only, I think it's 25 grand. So we don't have a lot of money to work with, and we have to be very conscious of our time, because what we found in the beginning was that we were essentially working for €2 an hour because we were putting in so much time to try to get this thing going, and we just didn't, it was more a labor of love, and that just doesn't last long-term, labors of love. So for us, it was a question of like, how much can we have a 16-week production cycle, 3 issues a year. That gives us 4 weeks off, unpaid, weeks off, of course. And we built that schedule around the teens. We found that we weren't getting any response or submissions from teens in the summertime. So we take a break in the summer and we extend our submissions window so that there's more time to receive stuff from the teens, things like that were kind of, more specific to us. But at the end of the day, so what I started to say to you was, I think with that 16-week schedule, let's say it works out to about 3.5 months, at our rate, I probably earn about €1,000 an issue.
Yeah.
That's give or take what I take in, but we pay everybody monthly. We pay the intern monthly, we pay ourselves monthly. We all submit invoices and we do it that way.
Cool. Thanks so much for that, Maggie. I'm just conscious of time now.
Yeah.
Move on, but it's really interesting to see the breakdown of how many hours you think you can commit, and therefore, you know, that's maybe a day or just over a day a week. And, you know, if for others to do the same, calculate how many days that is per year, and apply a rate that you're comfortable with, kind of thing. I'm just thinking of, like, I guess, you know, your first, for anyone doing an anthology or one-off or a first issue, you're setting up as a business and a publisher, as well as producing your first kind of product essentially for sale. And people might be, you know, I guess expect things not to take off immediately, like 200 sales in your first issue is great. And I know that Gorse, I'm always reminded of Gorse, you know, have a really interesting model in that they say, like, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do it beautifully and print 300 every year, and that's it, or every issue, and try and sell out the run. And so, like, Holy Show has been printing 1,000 or more and never selling out, you know, getting closer and closer. We're at issue 3 now and kind of up at like 600 or 700, and including selling back issues. But you know, don't, and particularly in a you know, a filling market, let's say, that, yeah, I guess keep your ambitions, not keep your ambitions low, that sounds terrible, but be realistic. Given that you're not going to be in, you know, most bookshops, it's not the same as trying to sell a new novel that Tramp or Stingfly or whoever have published. It's a different proposition entirely, and it's a kind of a slow gig. But, and I guess, speaking about like the need to sell and print runs and things like that, I'm going to come to Laura, a visual artist who is, you know, has done some, you've done some really interesting things with text that, you know, a lot of which doesn't necessarily fit into the book format. And I think you probably have a different attitude, Laura, to kind of print runs, or concerned about print runs or sales, you know, that an artist is creating a print object, and it's not about the kind of the numbers, it's about something else.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about some of your projects? And
sure. Yeah, I mean,
like
that was fascinating hearing Maggie's input there, because I feel like if Maggie's doing a masterclass in like the barcodes and all these different things that I've skirted over, I'll definitely be joining in for that. But I might just share screen just briefly there. These are just a couple of images from, so basically I applied for a project award. I was living in Dublin in the Fire Station Artist Studios, and I'm from County Kerry, and I had an idea that I'd like to do some kind of an artwork around the idea of text and landscape, somehow kind of coming from, I suppose, like years of reading farm signs and a lot of like self-initiated writing projects by local farmers, where they say things like feck off crows on bales, and just a lot of humor, and kind of, I suppose, the idea of like, could you like self-publish in a field, or could you self-publish on a mountain? And this part of this mountain is owned by my father. Most of it is owned in common, so there's maybe 7 farmers who share very harmoniously, as you can see by the large row of stakes that run from the base of the mountain all the way up over the top and down the other side. That's for another self-publishing project. But I was lucky, I suppose, that I had a bit of guidance from a fellow artist in the Fire Station who had success with Arts Council applications, and in particular the project award, because I suppose for me the visual artist project award seemed quite bulky, and even just I suppose the size of the award was quite frightening. You know, I was even thinking, how can I populate a budget for something around 30,000 seemed to me kind of insanity. And then what Alan kindly did was sat me down and just said, look, you need to pay yourself firstly, and that's a third kind of your Arts Council funding. So you're looking at a fee of, you know, around 10, because you're going to work on this for probably a year, but it's more likely going to be 2 years, which this turned out to be. And then you're going to need to engage with several, I suppose, specialists in different fields. So for example, for this project, I worked with a CNC engineer who could CNC these wooden letters for me. And so for this project, part of the funding was spent creating, installing these words on the mountain. And then a big part of that project was then spending about a year kind of researching into the Dukas folkloric archives, especially ones connected to this part of the mountain. There are several stories in the Dukas archive online that are connected to this particular landscape. There was actually a murder committed at this very spot, right where the words "where did they go" are situated. And so for me, I wanted to kind of unpack some of these maybe forgotten stories, stories that even local people had kind of disassociated themselves from just over time. Like my grandmother would kind of have been well versed in them, but just newer generations weren't as maybe familiar with them. And so part of that then was, these are some more of the letters on the mountain, but part of that was a newspaper. So I'll go back to these images in a second, but just to give you an idea of this newspaper that I made, it was called the Inch Conglomerate, and I did a print run of 1,000, and I suppose like the technical things, I was very lucky that my partner Chris, he worked for Visual Arts Ireland for 5 years, and part of his job was the production editor for the Visual Arts news sheet. So Chris, was kind of very au fait with the format of newspapers and how they are populated, and even just design and layout. So Chris agreed to work with me as designer and editor for this. He's since retired, not as my partner, but as my editor designer. But that was really interesting process, I suppose, because I was keen to I was writing these stories, but I was very keen to make an art object. And Chris suggested a company called the Newspaper Club, and they're based in the UK. And I think the minimum run is 300 copies of a newspaper, and they're all printed on newsprint. They accept PDF ready design documents, but I think you can work with them in a more detailed way where they might design things for you, but that would incur a higher cost. And I suppose just because I hadn't much experience with dealing with budgets of kind of, I suppose, a higher amount than I was used to, I was being quite careful. So Chris designed and edited the newspaper. I wrote the text pieces, and then we had two there were different ways, I suppose, that the newspaper got dispersed. So this newspaper box on the left hand side, this was on loan from the Dublin Inquirer. I got in touch with the Dublin Inquirer, and they kindly agreed to lend me the newspaper box for a year, which was very generous of them. And I reconfigured the Dublin Inquirer, their kind of classic color design was like this bright red newspaper box, and they were also very generous and allowed me to kind of repaint their box, while this was situated just on the mountain overlooking the letters. And then, sorry, I should say those images, and this is the local pub where we kind of launched the publication, and also kind of like launched the letters, if you like, as kind of this community event. And so I advertised that in the window of the pub there. On the left hand side, there's a poster that we just had advertising that there'd be a community meeting to kind of discuss these words that had appeared in the landscape, and also to bring out the publication. And so at the launch, I used part of the budget to pay for the launch, and also to buy everyone some drinks, which I thought would kind of soothe any maybe suspicious feelings around these strange letters appearing in the mountain. And I gave everyone a copy. There was about 150 people at the launch, and so I gave everyone a copy of the newspaper. And then kind of over the coming weeks, I suppose actually working with Brendan and Peter from Holy Show was great, because although I found out I didn't get as generous a writer's fee as newer writers, it was amazing to be part of Holy Show, and it actually gave the project kind of another breath of air as because the letters were on the mountain for about I think 9 months in total. They were they fell in, I think the launch you can see there in the paper was 25th of October 2019. So then as we rolled into early 2020, COVID pandemic started to, become evident in the world, and which nicely timed with a letter I had received from Kerry County Council to say that the letters had to come down immediately, or I was going to be fined 10 grand, 12 grand actually, which was going to take a sizable chunk out of any money I had left. So it was lovely to be involved with Holy Show, because that kind of broadened the kind of readership, I suppose, around the words in the landscape and also the newspaper. And so I think that kind of helped generate some sales through, which I then kind of did through my website, artist website, through a PayPal account. And so it was just a very, I suppose, basic setup on the website, just a web page and then a link. And I think I charged €10 including postage for the newspaper. So it was a lot cheaper if you walked the Kerry way in Kerry and bought the newspaper in the newspaper box. And then it was a bit more expensive when it came to buying it from myself. Now I still do have, I think I have about 200. So there was 1,000. I have about 100 left. But for me, I suppose as an artist, kind of going back to what Brenda was saying, I suppose the impetus is kind of the slow burn, if you like. And so for me, it's more valuable to have a kind of a little amount left that when things come up for me, like exhibitions, like I'm in Sweden at the moment at an art fair. So in the stand we have with Ormston House, I'll have a couple, just maybe 2 or 3 of the newspapers. I also have a more recent book I made called The Restless Bogman, which I'll explain a little bit about next. And so for things like this, it's handy for me to have a couple of these, because I won't be receiving project awards on any kind of regular basis, I imagine. So I suppose thinking through, kind of trying to plan ahead and think about how the publications can be kept for other shows coming up, or maybe events, or places where I'm showcasing my work in other countries, and even thinking about, there's a nice relationship I've kind of developed with the Library Project, who are based in Temple Bar, and they do stock the artist publications. I have 3 now, which I'm delighted about, made over the space of kind of 3-ish years, and the Interconglomerate being one of them. And they take a 30% charge for selling the books, but it's kind of a nice way to be kind of in the loop and part of, I suppose, just being like visible and keeping, and as I'm living in Kerry, I suppose, connected to kind of the Dublin art scene. But what I have done, kind of as I've been having exhibitions, for example, so this Restless Bogman book that I made, I might have a slide. This is actually a piece of the word installation that then appeared in a newspaper. The Irish, I think it was the Irish Examiner, took a snap of it and had it. So I thought that was a nice kind of a newspaper becoming a newspaper. And these are just some details from the Interconglomerate.
Laura, I'm just conscious of time, and I want to get Nidhi.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's my poor handling of the hour, but and we might go over the hour, just to say people who want to hang on, or if not, come back to the recording. But I guess just to ask you, like, these are sort of self-published projects, and I think in literature that historically tends to, it tends to mean doing something that a publisher usually does, but generally speaking, like to a lesser quality. You're going to get it distributed in fewer places. The cover design and the paper quality, just by dint of the fact of not being a professional publisher, will be the standard will be lower. But here, obviously, it's less about, success sort of means something different. It's about the quality of the project, and about the design, the object here. The Restless Bogman is particularly beautiful. I have a copy of the Interconglomerate here in front of me. Does self-publishing mean something different in visual art world?
Yeah, I think for me anyway, and I think it is something that I've discussed with other artist colleagues, but I suppose for me the book object is always connected to like a broader constellation of art objects. So for example, this Restless Bogman, it's a story about an artist who goes to college in London and then has this kind of demon, if you like, who follows her around and creates havoc because he wants to be back in the countryside, living, you know, and maybe he doesn't really think the art world is all it's cracked up to be, and it's just driving her mad while she's living in London. We'll say it's loosely autobiographical, but so I think the book element for me is like a component of the work that gets pulled out into the world through the process of writing. And then I suppose maybe foolishly so sometimes, if you're thinking about it in like monetary terms, the impetus is around like the development of it as an art object. And so for example, for this I worked with Aura Studios in Dublin, who Riso printed this book. So it was a run of 100. It may become a run of 200, depending, because I have 6 left now. So these were, I suppose, quite successful in terms of me selling them, and I sold most of them through the Crawford Art Gallery website while I had a show with the Crawford last year in June. So I kind of worked with the Crawford so that they put them on their website. They sold them, and they also sold them commission free to me, which was really generous of them. So I suppose the modeling is, it really depends, I think, you know, how the negotiations go with the institution that I'm working with. And I used some of my artist fee to pay for. The run of 100 was about €2,000, so it was quite an expensive piece to produce. But I was very adamant on kind of a vision I had for it. Like I wanted to look like a sod of turf because it was this bogman character who was interested in cutting turf as opposed to making art. And so conceptually, it had to feel like something you might burn in the fire. So even there was kind of a stack of it, but even the cover alone, our studio subbed that out to Plus Print in Dublin, and they made just the cover alone was €400 because I wanted this kind of really kind of electric green on this kind of very earthy kind of brown, quite tactile paper. So, and I mean, I'd be very slow to buy, you know, a jumper that costs more than €30, whereas I was like 400 quid, no problem for the cover, you know, because I was like, well, conceptually, it makes loads of sense. Yeah. So, you know, yeah, I suppose it is kind of a different philosophical approach, if you like, but you know, when there's funding involved, that's when it makes the real difference. So I suppose the project award, I would highly encourage anyone to apply for it. Like for me, it was a real game changer in terms of just giving myself scope to produce something and to use your imagination, and it certainly is easier, I think, when there's you know, when you have that freedom a little bit more financially to pay people to help you. So like, for example, like Brendan's colleague Peter McNamara was the editor for this, and not only the editor, but really helped steer me in terms of like a story arc and how to develop my writing a bit more. Like he kind of mentored me through this process, and I was able to pay Peter for his time. So there were a lot of people involved in it, and you know, I'm a notoriously bad speller. I need to be triple checked, you know, when it comes to printing something. So being able to pay people to help me with that was really, really important as well. And I wouldn't be able to do that without, you know, either funding from the project award, or in this case, this was from the art, you know, kind of the production budget and artist fee that came from the Crawford Gallery.
Laura, thanks so much for that. It's, yeah, it really is. It's so interesting. I guess just thinking about, and I know that like Nidhi and Holy Show, we had a call out recently for artists or for writers to apply, but to collaborate with visual artists. And I know that Nidhi kind of had this idea in mind, or she mentioned the same word, kind of art object. I think what you've shown us there is text, is literature, but it's in a format that we don't usually see it. It's also, you know, for people, I guess people applying to the project board maybe who are thinking of becoming editors on their own project, but I think it's also open to writers to apply to create a book of their own work. And I remember I was talking to a poet recently, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, who got funded by a art centre, $6,000 to write a collection of poetry. Now, I'm pretty sure that no one in Irish poetry publishing history has ever received 6,000 from a publisher to to create a book of poems. But sometimes it's not just the industry we come from, where the advance is, or what you get paid is based on proposed sales. We kind of, I think we need to start looking at other models of how we fund writers to do the thing they do, or to spend time on the writing they want to get done, and also to create beautiful things like you have done, so that people can become self-publishers of their own work in this kind of much more conceptually respectable way. When you do it as well as that, it's bound to kind of garner that kind of love and respect. But so coming to Nidhi, just to go back to the Solstice stories, Nidhi, would you say a little bit about, you know, your notion about what that is, and what you maybe expand on your idea for what you think is possible in publishing terms for like non-standard print objects? What do you imagine publishing through the Solstice stories?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. And it is really cool to see all the work you've done, Laura. So it's really cool to see that, especially that shape of the book, which I really love books that have like non-traditional shapes. So it's been great to hear. So Solstice Stories, it's a sort of collaborative project that I came up with before the pandemic, but it was sort of accelerated by the pandemic as well, I think, because the idea was that we bring together writers and artists from other art forms that may not traditionally be seen as sort of like ideal collaborators for writers, because I think when people think about collaboration in terms of text, they think about visual art. So it's like photography, illustration, you know, paintings, something that can also be reproduced on a page. And I was interested in sort of looking at ways in which we could explore maybe bringing in a different audience for literature. So it isn't just somebody who would consider themselves a reader or a writer who would engage with that thing. So I had in mind like a poet collaborating with a circus performer, for instance, or an aerial artist, or having maybe a storyteller and a puppeteer, you know, or a writer with a light artist, or something where you could somehow expand the participation of people who are also experiencing that thing. So it isn't, I think traditionally reading is seen as kind of a very private experience between the writer and the reader, which happens sort of internally all the time, you know, and it doesn't, that intimacy somehow doesn't seem to extend outside of that encounter. And so I wanted to see what would happen if we tried to kind of embody that somehow, you know, and see if it was possible or if it wouldn't work. So for the first kind of installment of Solstice, so we do one on each solstice. So for the summer solstice, we commissioned writers and artists that we knew we had worked with before and who we thought were kind of exploring similar themes, or they had some sort of resonance in terms of style or tone. So for the first one, we have Kerry Doherty and Micheál McCann, the writers, and then we have photographer Michelle Maloney, and they're kind of working off themes of belonging, place, home, change, because both the writers are from Derry and then moved outside, but still retain a really strong connection to their home place. And Michelle is kind of based in Belfast, but also very, her work engages with the north of Ireland and sort of the, I suppose the effects of conflict and kind of collective trauma and grief. And we actually just got the book, so I can I can show you a little bit of it. So we then collaborated with Ailish Murphy, who's a book artist who's based in Clare, and we decided to make it into an object which you could kind of read in different ways. So there isn't like one way to read it. It's not like a standard book that you turn the pages. So this is like a double accordion style book, which means that it opens out both ways like this. So you get like a mix of text and image depending on how you kind of turn the page and where you let it land. And you'll see some of the pages don't have any text on them, and then some of them are kind of mixed. So I guess with this, it's a limited edition run of 300 copies. And I suppose like part of the reason for doing that was because there's always some sort of value that's attached to something that is not freely available. So you have to, if you want it, you need to get it in that limited time period, otherwise you won't have it. So there's that kind of idea of a collector's item, but also I think the notion of it being one-off, of it being an experience that you can't repeat and that isn't available on demand, which for me was part of the idea, because a book's shelf life is sort of, it's eternal in a way. It's sort of like if I want to read something that was written in 1960, I can go online and buy it and read it now. But I wanted this to be temporal in a way, so it's not available in every time because it speaks to this particular time and what's going on in this moment. And that was really important. And so all the artists kind of, I think the urgency that was built into that comes through in the book as well. And sort of that idea of transience, that, it's that art isn't maybe always available for consumption, which is more of a philosophical kind of idea. But yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons for Solstice. So for the second year of Solstice, we collaborated with Holy Show, and we have an open call to which we got quite a good number of submissions, and very different, all very different proposals. But it's been really great to see the ideas that people have had, because I think like there are some things that I didn't think could translate into an art object, but when I read the proposal, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I can see how that might work. For example, a sculptor working with a writer, things like that. So yeah, that's the idea behind Solstice, just in really kind of broad terms.
And do you think, yeah, I guess, are we, like, I love that idea, of not using is a terrible term, but working with other artists to bring, the collaboration away from the solo individual experience and out into maybe sort of almost an outreach project in the way that Laura's Inch Conglomerate was, or turn something into, not just a print object, but an event or a happening, or that's clearly a part of what you want to do, or is there other ideas behind why you want to get writers connected with other artists or other art forms?
Well, I think a lot of the reason is that I think it's incredibly hard to be a writer in terms of making a career and income out of writing. Maybe more so than other art forms as well, because there is this kind of pervasive idea that you don't need anything to be a writer. Like, what do you need? You need pen and paper, or you need like a laptop. You don't need material. You don't need equipment. You don't need to invest in all these. You don't need a rehearsal space. You don't need an office. And I think it was 2 years ago that I was looking at kind of the allocation of funds in the Arts Council to different art forms, how much money from the budget was actually going to particular art forms. And I think in literature it was like 4% of the overall arts budget was for literature, which includes, publishers plus individual writers plus whoever else is working in literature, which is a really tiny amount for a nation that is sort of like kind of built on writers and literature. So I found that really interesting, and I sort of wanted to break away from this idea that, it's interesting for me as well, because I work with Culture Ireland, as you know, and their remit is sort of to send Irish artists abroad so that overseas people can kind of get an idea of what's happening in the Irish arts. And whenever a writer puts in an application, it's always like, well, can we tag them onto something? Can we tag them onto like a group of musicians who are touring, or like these visual artists who are going to this biennale or something, you know, like we don't want to just send them alone to this place, or can they add in like 3 or 4 other cities so they do like a tour, and then it makes sense to financially kind of, you know, fund them. And it's a very interesting way of looking at things, because I think generally the arts applications, even within the Arts Council, are kind of geared towards performing arts. So the budgets and the templates and the questions that are asked are very much in the vein of how are you going to fund other people working on your project? How are you gonna, you know, set up and take down, and how much are you going to bring in the box office? And a lot of these things aren't really applicable to literature. And so when you go with your kind of paltry, I'm gonna make like 3,000 euros off of this thing, you know, they're sort of like, yeah, okay. But he can go and play a gig and bring in like 500,000 in like 3 hours, you know. So it doesn't, like, it's not comparable. So I wanted to somehow enter that argument from a different door, I suppose, and say, you know, if we do start collaborating with people who may be doing shows, you know, in, I don't know, the West End or something, and bringing in 50 million or whatever over the course of their tour, what does that then mean for writers? Are there other ways in which we can collaborate and kind of showcase what we do, so you're not always working by yourself in your room, you know, for like years at a time before you have anything to show for it? Because that's the other thing, is if you're writing a book, it will take you at least a year, if not more, to get it out from, you know, the time you've written it to when it's edited to when it's then published, and all the marketing and everything. So yeah, that, I think part of it was that I wanted to kind of draw attention to the fact that the other thing is that writers, it's only when you're writing that you're actually a writer, you know. So things like research, or when you're letting something percolate in your brain, for example, you don't get paid for that. You know, you only get paid for the thing that you're delivering, basically the output. You said you would write 1,000 words, here's 1,000 words. Okay, here's your 1,000 euros for those 1,000 words, you know. But it doesn't matter that you spent like maybe, you know, 15 days on it besides what you wrote. So I think the idea also behind it was that with the Solstice stories, and also with all the Skein authors, actually, we offer a non-refundable commission fee to every writer, and this is sort of regardless of whether their work is published or not, whether they hit whatever targets we set for them in terms of sales, you know. It doesn't have anything to do with the royalties. It's a fee for their the work that they put into writing, and that is calculated currently on how much time they anticipate spending on. So if they say it's going to take me 3 months, for example, to work on this book, if I worked on it full time, you would assume that then they were not working their regular job if they had one, or you would kind of calculate the income based on that. So it gives them that financial security, at least for the work that they are doing, that they can spend that time on it, and they don't need to, I suppose it's not tied to anything. It's not sort of like dependent on the success of the book commercially or in the market or anything like that, which allows us to work with debut writers, with newer writers who may not have much experience, because then they feel like they're being treated in the same way that we would treat any of our other writers, you know, so they haven't had to prove themselves in a way to be able to become a writer. So it makes it slightly more feasible. Now, again, that's not a huge amount of money. So, for example, the Arts Council Commission's award for literature is 13,000 euros, which is significantly less than the other art forms commission awards. You would get up to 25 or 30,000 sometimes. But it's still, it's good for someone for a few months, you know. So yeah, we are trying to work on that model, and changing it slightly away from the royalty structure solely, which is more benefit to the publisher than it is to the writers themselves.
Yeah, congratulations, I guess, and fair play on making those first steps. in changing that model, and maybe I feels like everyone in the sector, the people who benefit from these projects, writers as well, it's a big mind shift, and we have a lot of work to do, I think, convincing people that to consider these kind of projects or initiatives on a commissioning model versus a advances commercial model. But no, it's great work that you're doing there, and I think hopefully Match in the Dark will begin conversations with other publishers and other funders about conceiving of the work that writers engage in, paying them for their time as opposed to for a very small percentage of projected sales of a reasonably small print run, where it is the case still that Irish publishers are paying advances of in and around the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 euro mark, and that's that they're doing the best they can by their writers. It's not a criticism, it's just about the way we've traditionally sold books and drafted contracts and paid writers. So I think that the project award in itself is kind of a step towards that model too. And so I hope that encourages everyone here who is applying for the project award or similar awards to think of paying yourself first and foremost, like Laura said, predict all the costs, but predict your own time too, and be generous to yourself, because you want to end up with kind of like minimum wage at least. Often these kind of books that take years get paid nothing close to that. So hopefully we can kind of make developments in that area. And on that note, we're well over time, and I think the whole Zoom will collapse. I have it set for 1 hour and 15 minutes if I don't stop. So thank you, Laura. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Nidhi. Thank everyone for coming on the call. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time, hopefully. And good luck and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, guys. Take care.